And as they say, the greeting for during the holiday of Sukkot is Moadim L'Simcha. May we have a happy holiday. Moed is just another word for holiday in Hebrew. We're used to the word Chag. We would say Chag Sameach, but that's traditionally saved for the actual Yom Tov days, the days of the holiday that are treated like Shabbat. So the first 2 days and last 2 days of the holiday, you'd say Chag Sameach. But the intermediate days of Passover and Sukkot, you say Moadim L'Simcha. Or you could just say, you could still say Chag Sameach and nobody would be upset with you for saying that. But since it's the intermediate days of Sukkot, that means that we are at the end of the Torah reading cycle. And this Shabbat is Shmini Atzeret, and it's a separate Torah reading just for Shmini Atzeret. But Saturday night and Sunday, that's the only time actually you read Torah at night, because the tradition is we take the Torahs out of the ark and sing and dance with them. And the tradition is if you're going to take the Torah out of the ark, it would be disrespectful not to read from it. You can't just take it out, sing and dance, and put it back in the ark. So we read 3 aliyot from this portion, VeZot HaBracha, which is on page 1202 in the Eitz Chaim, or whatever Chumash or Bible you're looking at. You look for chapter 33 of Deuteronomy. It's right near the end of the Torah. We read 3 aliyot Saturday night, and you read all of VeZot HaBracha on Sunday morning this year on Simchat Torah itself. Hi, Jan. And we're looking at just giving the background to VeZot HaBracha, doing it on Simchat Torah. The way usually it's done, the way we've done it in our shul, depending on the crowd, we often have 2 Torahs out. Sometimes we've had even 3 Torah scrolls out, so that everybody in the congregation can have an aliyah. So you read the first 5 aliyot over and over and over again until everybody in the congregation has had their aliyah. And then what's listed as the 6th aliyah, which is the last portion of the entire Torah itself from chapter 34, that is saved for an aliyah called Chatan Torah, or to be egalitarian, it could be Kalat HaTorah, either groom or bride of the Torah. And most congregations, give this out to a macher in the synagogue, someone who, is contributes and supports the synagogue very generously. Or it could be to someone who supports the synagogue through their time and volunteer efforts as well. So we didn't get to giving out a Chatan Torah and a Chatan Breshit, or Kalat Torah, Kalat Breshit this year. But sometimes in the past, we've given Chatan Torah to the oldest person in the congregation that day, and the Breshit Aliyah to the youngest person closest to Bar Bat Mitzvah, and invite all the children up at that point as well. So we're not doing that this year because of the COVID. We're kind of redoing, as I sent out in an email earlier this morning. You see, we're even doing some videos that I'm going to be showing both Saturday night and Sunday, which hopefully will lift our spirits. I found BJ, B'nai Jeshurun, on the Upper West Side, is known for its very musical and very popular services. They always have hundreds of people attend their Kabbalat Shabbat services. And for Simchat Torah, they got people out on the streets. Some of my daughters who live on the Upper West Side have been to BJ for Simchat Torah. It's really the thing to do. Obviously, they're not doing that this year, but they live streamed their Simchat Torah service and recorded it. So I'll be playing a little bit of the music of their hakafot, their circle dances that they have. And And there'll be a couple other things that I'll be sharing too. But so anyway, that's VeZot HaBracha, that we what is the sixth Aliyah is the last portion from the Torah. The seventh Aliyah on Simchat Torah is we go back, and our custom had been to unroll the entire Torah around the sanctuary so people can see the entire Torah and what it looks like. Instead, I'm going to have a video of a woman scribe who worked for the Jewish Museum in New York. There's a short video explaining and showing how she works as a scribe. So it's very interesting to actually see her write the letters into the Torah. So that should be nice to see. And then we roll it back up again to Breshit and start reading all over again. So instead, it'll be Paul reading Torah. And I also noticed, Paul, you're doing a Haftarah. So maybe I'll do the Breshit part and you can do the other parts of the Torah. I usually read the Breshit part anyway. And so that's how we're going to do Simchat Torah this year. Hopefully, it'll be a unique experience and not have to be repeated next year. So let's look at VeZot HaBracha, which begins on 12:02, and the blessing for Torah study. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asuk b'divrei Torah. So what this is essentially is Moses blessing the people before he dies. And what I want to look at right away is below the line in the commentary on page 1202, the introduction here. Moses blesses the tribes before his death, prompting the Midrash to put these words into his mouth. All my life I have scolded this people. At the end of my life, let me leave them with a blessing. And you see there, the source is Midrash Petirat Moshe, Midrash Death of Moses. I'd never heard of that collection of Midrash before. I'm not familiar with it at all, so I can't tell you anything about that Midrashic source. So it makes sense that there would be a collection of Midrashim about Moses' death, but those Midrash are scattered around the traditional sources of Midrash. Either Deuteronomy Rabbah is one collection of story Midrashim on the book of Deuteronomy. There's the Sifrei, which is the Halacha, the Jewish law Midrash about the book of Deuteronomy. And then there are other collections, Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, there's Tanhuma, Pesikta de Rav Kahana. These are the major collections of Midrashim. So where Midrash Petirat Moshe came from, I can't tell you. So, but it's clearly from the author of this Midrash. The idea is that Moses usually scolds the people, and throughout the book of Deuteronomy, there's a lot of scolding going on, as well as, words of encouragement. And, back in the book of Exodus, there's scolding after the golden calf and etc. So there is a lot of scolding that Moses has done. So let me leave them with a blessing. So in other words, Moses might be thinking, I don't want the people to think that I've scolded them my whole life. As I'm about to die, let them remember this blessing that I'm imparting to them, and that should be what they remember about me. And then the commentary continues, as Genesis concluded with Jacob on his deathbed, blessing his 12 sons, Deuteronomy concludes with Moses on the eve of his death, blessing the 12 tribes. So before I finish this, it's important to understand the Torah as one cohesive text. And so traditionally, that's how we understand the Torah, as one cohesive text. Biblical scholars have a different take on it. They see it as an edited anthology of different texts from different strands of authorship that were put together later than the time period that the Torah describes. But for traditional minded Jews, forgetting the biblical scholarship perspective, clearly we're supposed to understand the 5 books of Moses as one entire book. It's just 5 volumes of one book. So what happens in the first book can foreshadow what happens at the end. So if Jacob is blessing his 12 sons before he dies, those 12 sons become the tribes of Israel. So we can't just see that chapter 50 or 49 of the book of Genesis as its own unit for itself. We have to understand it in light of the entire Torah as foreshadowing or prophesying what these sons will represent for their descendants as the tribes of Israel. So we can't just see Jacob blessing his sons. We have to see God through Jacob blessing the people of Israel when he's blessing them in chapter 49. So it's then interesting to compare that blessing from chapter 49 of Genesis to to this chapter in which these tribes are blessed. And we're going to look at something about that in a few moments. And then as the commentary concludes, what was once a single family with a vision of God's plan for them has now become a nation poised to enter the promised land and possessing a blueprint for becoming a special people, a model of how God wants humanity to live. Right? So, so the Torah, in one sense, is about a family transformation into a nation. And what we see then is mostly in the Torah, there are bits and pieces of how the people kind of act in terms of, sinning and complaining to Moses about being thirsty and hungry. But essentially what the Torah is this blueprint, providing setting out the ideals for how to start society, and then leaving them with this blessing. This is your potential, O people of Israel. And then the rest of the Bible showing how most of the time the people failed to achieve their potential and failed to follow this blueprint. So let's look a little bit in the English translation of the Torah until page. So I'll read from 1202 through the second Aliyah on 1205. This is the blessing with which Moses, the man of God, bade the Israelites farewell before he died. So it's a more poetic translation. Literally, and this is the blessing that Moses, the man of God, blessed the people of Israel before he died. So the English translation is adding bidding farewell, which isn't here in the Hebrew. It's just, this is the blessing that Moses blessed the people before he died. And he said, the Lord came from Sinai. He shone upon them from Seir. He appeared from Mount Paran and approached from VeZot Kodesh, lightning flashing at them from his right. So all these are just different terms for Mount Sinai. Sinai, Seir, Mount Paran, VeZot Kodesh, all just different names for that area of the wilderness where the Torah came from, and reminding the people of that awesome experience of lightning and thunder and the shofar sound. Lover indeed of the people, they're hallowed are all in your hand. They followed in your steps, accepting your pronouncements, right? So Moses is saying that the people were following God. Right there at Mount Sinai was this intense experience where the people were willing to follow God. When Moses charged us with the teaching as the heritage of the congregation of Jacob. There's just a note here. Let me just let in Diane Kival. There's a note here about this verse that is, hi Diane, we're Deuteronomy, we're VeZot HaBracha, 1203 in the Eitz Chaim, or chapter 33, verse 4, whatever Chumash you are. The Hebrew is Torah tziva lanu Moshe morasha kehilat Yaakov. This is a famous line, and there's a famous tune for it that often we sing when we're singing and dancing with the Torahs. Torah, 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 tziva lanu Moshe. Torah, 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 tziva lanu Moshe. Morasha kehilat Yaakov. Not too many people know that last part of the song. Morasha kehilat Yaakov. Morasha kehilat Yaakov. Torah tziva lanu Moshe. Okay, so that's the classic tune for this. As the commentary says, traditionally, this is one of the first verses from the Torah a Jewish child is taught. Torah tziva lanu Moshe. Moses commanded us the Torah. Morasha kehilat Yaakov, as a legacy or a heritage for the congregation of Jacob. So that's what we understand the Torah to be. And it makes sense that it would be one of the first things that a child would learn when they're studying the Torah, that this isn't just any other book that the child is studying, that the teacher is teaching. This is an ancient book, a holy book. Okay, so then, and then the next verse is also a song that is often sung in these circle dances. V'hibishu melech b'tasef rashayam yachad yachad shiftei Yisrael. V'hibishu melech b'tasef rashayam yachad yachad shiftei Yisrael. A lot of DJs at weddings, when they play this, usually mess up the Hebrew royally, but this is what it is. Yeshurun is another name, a poetic name for Israel. Then he became king in Jeshurun, when the heads of the people assembled, the tribes of Israel together. So now comes the blessing part. So this was just the intro of reminding us of the Sinai experience, and that we should always remember the Sinai experience. May Reuben live and not die, though few be his numbers. And as it turns out, so this gets to, when was this poem written? Was it actually composed by Moses before the people entered the land of Israel? Or was it written later as a result of how the people of Israel ended up? And that the poem was written after the fact. So that it doesn't matter before or after. It's just interesting that though few be the number of Reuben is one of the first. So first it was Reuben and the tribe of Gad and half the tribe of Manasseh, who settled outside of the land of Israel on the eastern side of the Jordan River. And they promised, in exchange for being allowed to settle there and not enter the land of Israel with their brethren, that they would always be supportive and fight their battles with them. But what resulted was that Reuben and Gad, were the first tribes to be conquered by the Assyrians and exiled and gone forever. So Reuben, being the firstborn of Jacob, does not have, we're called Jews, and it's Judaism after the tribe of Judah. We're not Reubens, and it's not Reubenism. Okay, so usually the firstborn gets the inheritance, but clearly throughout the Torah and throughout Jewish history, it's the younger child that ends up with the inheritance. King David himself is the youngest of 7 brothers chosen to be king of Israel. Moses is the younger brother to Aaron, and he's chosen to lead the people. Though Aaron is the oldest and he becomes the high priest, it's usually then the oldest child of the high priest who becomes the next high priest. So that stayed as oldest child. But there are other kings. David's youngest son Solomon becomes the next king, not the oldest son. So you have battles throughout waged between older and younger brothers. But it's just, I understood, Reuben, oldest son, gets lost to Jewish history forever. And then, so we're going out of order also, out of birth order here. In the book of Genesis, it goes in birth order as Jacob gives the blessing to his children. Here it's Reuben, Shimon, Levi, Yehudah. Those are the first four. So here it goes from Reuben to verse 7, and this he said of Judah. Hear, O Lord, the voice of Judah, and restore him to his people. Though his own hands strive for him, help him against his foes. And of Levi, so then again, out of birth order, and of Levi he said, let your Tumim and Urim be with your faithful one. So in Exodus, we're told about the tribe of Levi, namely the Kohanim, the subset of the tribe of Levi, has the Urim and Tumim, these stones that are supposed to be kind of oracle stones that would be referred to in time of distress in Jewish history, that the Urim and Tumim would somehow give a message to the Kohen Gadol as to whether the people should go to war or something like that. Let your Urim and Tumim, and that happens to be the symbol, by the way, on Yale University's logo. If you just look up Yale University and look at its logo, it has Hebrew on it, and it has Urim and Tumim. So it's supposed to be a source of knowledge, right? A source of knowledge, that's a hidden source of knowledge. So for a university symbol, remember Yale, founded by the founding fathers, right? Before the Declaration of Independence, the founding fathers of our country were all very well-read biblical people and Protestant and knew Hebrew and looked to the Torah as a guide. And so it's not unusual. It wouldn't be unusual to have Hebrew. I mean, Hebrew was part of the core curriculum of Harvard University when it was established in 1632. That Hebrew was part of the core curriculum. You had to learn Hebrew, Greek, and Latin as a university student at Harvard. And I would imagine that would have been the same at Yale University too. So Urim and Tumim as a source of knowledge, but as as a logo for a university, it's knowledge that you can find in books. Urim and Tumim are as knowledge revealed only to the Kohen Gadol, and no one else can access that knowledge except for the Kohen Gadol. So let your Tumim and Urim be with your faithful one, whom you tested at Massah, challenged at the waters of Meribah, who said of his father and mother, I consider them not. His brothers he disregarded, ignored his own children. Your precepts alone they observed and kept your covenant. They shall teach your laws to Jacob and your instructions to Israel. They shall offer you incense to savor and whole offerings on your altar. Bless, O Lord, his substance and favor his undertakings. Smite the loins of his foes. Let his enemies rise no more. So this is the kind of the theme of this blessing. So there's one comment here below the line on 1204 about Levi, because we'd have to look. If you're in the Eitz Chaim, I just want to go back to the blessing that Jacob gave to his children. And if we look at Exodus chapter 49, verse 5, we'll see what he says about Levi there. Shimon and Levi are a pair, page 300 in the Eitz Chaim. Their weapons are tools of lawlessness. Let not my person be included in their council. Let not my being be counted in their assembly. For when angry, they slay men, and when pleased, they maim oxen. So it's not exactly a blessing that Jacob is giving to Shimon and Levi. It's more of a response to what they did. Remember when Jacob's daughter, these children's sister, Dinah, was raped by the prince of Shechem, he then wanted to marry Dinah afterwards. And Shimon and Levi said, okay, we don't really intermarry, but we will if you all circumcise. They did, and then Shimon and Levi and their brothers killed all the male inhabitants of Shechem as revenge for raping their sister. So that's what Jacob is referring to here. So it's a negative idea. Let not my being be counted in their assembly. So Jacob said, I want nothing to do with Shimon and Levi. They're violent people. But here, Levi, let your Urim and Tumim be with your faithful ones. So Levi is now a faithful person. So the qualities of zeal, the commentary on 1204, that led Jacob to condemn Levi have been sublimated to the service of God and God's altar so that Moses now can bless the Levites. So the tribe of Levi was transformed from this violent tribe and family from early history to being the caretakers and teachers of Israelite religion to the rest of the community. How that works, biblical scholars can have written a lot about why Levi was chosen to serve in the temple. Why wasn't it the tribe of Reuben or some other tribe? It's just scholars and rabbis have comments about that. There's one more thing I want to say, share with you, and that is on 1206. We see something interesting about the tribes of Zebulun and Issachar. So verse 18, what's listed as the start of the fourth aliyah, page 1206, has this. Veli Zvulun Amar, Samach Zvulun Betzetecha, V'Yisachar Ba'ohalecha. There's a double sin there, but the second sin is not pronounced. So it's not V'Yisachar, because there's no vowel under that second letter sin. It's just how it's spelled in the Hebrew, but it's pronounced just Issachar. Usually a double S means it's a shin in Hebrew. When something is written in English with a double S as a name or a place or a word in the Bible, it represents the letter shin. But here the double S is because of the double sin in the word. You see, it's Yud, Sin, Kaf, Resh to spell Yisachar, but it's always pronounced Yisachar, not Yisachar. But so, and of Zvulun he said, rejoice, O Zebulun, on your journeys, and Yisachar in your tents. So what does that mean? What kind of journeys is Zebulun going on? And what is Yisachar doing in their tents? So there's midrash about this down below. The tribes of Yisachar and Zebulun are joined in a single verse, right? They don't get their own separate blessings. Rashi, based on the Tanchuma, the one midrash collection, cites the tradition that the people of the tribe of Zebulun were merchants. Rejoice on your journeys. What were they journeying? Well, they were in caravans, and they were merchants. That's where they were. So let your merchant, may your travels as merchants be successful. So that's why you're rejoicing. Whose prosperity subsidized the tribe of Yisachar, enabling them to stay home and study Torah. Because what else are you doing in your tents than studying Torah? We have that back about the description of Jacob and Esau when they're born, that Yaakov was Ish Tam Yoshev Ohalim, that he was a simple or innocent person, stayed at home. I mean, that's how you would understand it, because they had tents as homes back then, not stone or wood dwellings. But what else are you doing in your tent if not studying? And also, when Balaam blessed the people of Israel in the book of Numbers, one of the blessings was Matovu Ohalecha Yaakov. How goodly are your tents, O Jacob. And that's what we say when we walk into a synagogue. So the ohel, the tent, is understood not as simply as a home, but more in this midrashic sense as a synagogue or a beit midrash, a house of study. So the rabbis, that's how they're understanding this. The Zebulun were merchants, Yissachar were Torah scholars, and therefore they had an agreement, Zebulun and Yissachar. And if you look at a map on the back of the Eitz Chaim of how the tribes were divided, on the maps in the back, the glossy pages back there, take a look at the map. You'll see that Zebulun is right next to Yissachar. Yissachar is located just to the south of the Kinneret. So look in the north to the Sea of Galilee, where that is on the map. And you'll see that right below it is Yissachar. And then to the left of it, in that region there, what is today the lower Galilee, is where the tribe of Zebulun settled. So they're right next door to each other. And what the Midrash suggests is that Zebulun were the caravan traders, and they had an agreement with Yissachar. Okay, you guys be the Torah study, and we'll fund your Torah study. We'll be your patrons. So then that is a model for in the ultra-Orthodox community today, that the business people, the wealthy people, take care of the people who study. And you have stories about this from the shtetl, Isaac Bashevis Singer, other people who write about shtetl life in Poland and Russia, to talk a lot about how, the yeshivas were sponsored by the wealthy in the community, and the yeshiva students were hosted in wealthy people's homes for Shabbos meals, for holidays, etc. So it's a model based on the Midrash of how at least in the ultra-Orthodox community, Torah scholarship is maintained today. So, and it is still the case in Borough Park and Muncie and in Israel in the ultra-Orthodox neighborhoods. This is how it's done. The wealthy are contacted by the Rosh Yeshiva, the head of the yeshiva, for donations to sponsor the Torah scholars. Yes, Elizabeth.
I see that following what you just
I know. I want to get there. I'm saving all that. Yeah. I'm just explaining how this model existed throughout history and still exists today.
Yes.
Yet, what Elizabeth was reading ahead was what I want to share right now. Maimonides. So this is, again, we have to understand that. Okay, Alec Wagenheim is joining this. We're going to see if he does it right. Join computer audio. Hey, Zella, can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent, you did it. I taught you well. Very good. Very good. Okay. I helped Alec figure out how to get onto Zoom yesterday. So the lesson stuck. So that's good. Alec, what we're studying is the last portion of the Torah. We're looking at the portion VeZot HaBracha. So I'm on page 1206 in the Eitz Chaim, if you have that in your study there, or if not, just follow along, just listen in. I'm also, I'm going to mute you, so you'll see that your microphone now has a red line through it, but you can still hear me. So I explained this model, how it works throughout Jewish history, how it still works in the ultra-Orthodox community today. It still works in the Orthodox community today. Hebrew Academy, right here in the Washington area, is the Melvin J. Berman Hebrew Academy, and the Berman family are an extremely generous philanthropic family in the Orthodox community here in Greater Washington, and they see it as their honor to support Jewish education in that way. And that's a long-held tradition all the way back to this verse right here, if not other verses as well in the Torah, that we take care of each other. But our Chumash, which is a conservative movement edited Chumash, which offers a different approach to understanding the traditional model of yeshiva study, right? I don't look like a yeshiva student, a typical yeshiva student, understanding then what Maimonides had to say. And Maimonides rejects this model in an unusually sharp comment. The Eitz Chaim says, quote, "Whoever deliberately sets out to devote himself to the Torah and not work for a living, but be dependent on charity, has thereby desecrated the divine name, brought the Torah into disrepute, extinguished the light of religion, brought evil upon himself, and forfeited the hereafter." A scathing comment about this model of supporting Torah scholarship. And Maimonides, so the Talmud has as a very important model for life. All the rabbis had a job. They were, Rabbi Joshua was a needle maker. Some other rabbi was a blacksmith. A lot of rabbis were farmers. Rabbi Akiva was a shepherd for his father-in-law. They all had jobs, and Torah study was, I don't want to say it's secondary to their job. It was a component of their life. It wasn't the be-all and end-all of their life. And so that's the model that the Talmud presents for how we're supposed to study Torah. That we're not supposed to study Torah 24/7. Our job is to make a living and to find time to study Torah. Our job is to make a living and navigate the secular world around us and imbue it with Torah study and Torah knowledge, not live in a Torah world and have little contact with secular society or getting our hands literally dirty. That's what Maimonides had to say about this. What these ultra-Orthodox yeshivas say about Maimonides' comment, because they all study Maimonides. They all study his book, the Mishnah Torah, which is where this is from. They all study it. How they comment on this, I have no idea. But obviously, Maimonides himself was a physician. He made his money as a physician to the Sultan of Egypt. So he was born in Spain, in Cordoba, and there's a statue of him in Cordoba, I understand. Haven't been there. That's on my bucket list, to go to southern Spain and to see Toledo, Seville, and Cordoba, these communities, and Granada, which had large Jewish communities in the Middle Ages until driven out by the Christians when they drove out the Muslims. So he and his family left and went to Morocco. So he lived in Fez, Morocco for a while, and then he migrated to Egypt as he became a physician and worked for the Sultan of Egypt. So he worked full-time as the Sultan's personal physician. And then we know that he stayed up late to study Torah and to answer the questions. He became like the chief rabbi of the Sephardic world at the time. And the Yemenite Jewish community saw Maimonides as their chief rabbi. And the Yemenite community today, the Yemenite Jewish community today still sees Maimonides as their like, that's Jewish life for the Yemenite Jewish communities based on how Maimonides taught it. So Sephardic rabbi, and it's perhaps the ultra-Orthodox Jews today, mainly the yeshivas are mainly Ashkenazi yeshivas. So they might simply say Maimonides is not part of our tradition. He's Sephardi, not Ashkenazi. But I will say that Rabbi Joseph Caro, when he wrote the Shulchan Aruch in the 1500s, a Sephardi rabbi, used an Ashkenazi rabbi, Rabbeinu Asher, and used Maimonides and one other rabbi. Oh boy, I failed the rabbi test. If my halacha teacher now would see me, and I wouldn't be able to say the third rabbi that that Joseph Caro based his Shulchan Aruch on. Oh my. Well, maybe it's the Ashkenazi rabbi, Moses Isserles, based the Shulchan Aruch on Rabbi Joseph Caro, Maimonides, and Rabbeinu Asher. I think that's what it is. So you have the Ashkenazi Moses Isserles of the Shulchan Aruch basing it on two Sephardi and an Ashkenazi rabbi. So there is a tradition to meld Ashkenazi Sephardi tradition, but it's possible in the Ashkenazi world today that still has this model of supporting students and letting them study 24/7 and raising money from wealthy people to support these business people. And in fact, in Israel today, taxpayer money goes to support some of these yeshivas too. This is totally against Maimonides' model. And so there is something to be said for Maimonides' model that Torah is meant to be lived. It is not meant to overwhelm your life. You're not meant to be supported in Torah study by somebody else. You're meant to make a living as well, which gets to a whole different point about how congregation rabbis are supported in America and Canada today. There are that would be I'm opening a Pandora's box there, but I'm quickly closing it by saying that's a discussion for another time. But it gets to how Jewish communities around the world work, and that Jewish communities in France and England are supported by taxpayer money. In France and England, all religious communities in France and England are supported by taxpayer money, so that the Jewish community has an official representative body that receives the money from the government of France and the government of England and disperses it accordingly. That's just how it works. And I think that's how it works in Germany as well. In Israel, obviously, it works only through the Orthodox. And in America and Canada, obviously, it's a voluntary system of membership dues. So in England and France, as a Jew, you pay accordingly. And I think as a member of any religion, you pay a particular tax that goes to support your particular religion. So it's not membership dues per se, but more your tax money supports your education. So that if you went to Jewish day school in France, it would be heavily subsidized by the French government, as opposed to how it works in America and Canada, obviously. But it all gets to how we understand the why Zebulun and Yissachar were put together in the same verse, as opposed to being separate tribes in and of themselves regarding this blessing. And the last thing I wanted to look at, and we'll end with this today, is from chapter 34. The very end is about Moses' death, page 1212. And there's a description here which begs the question, did Moses write this or did somebody else write this? So if we start on 12:11, the period, it's like in verse 8, it starts a new paragraph. The period of wailing and mourning for Moses came to an end. Now Joshua, son of Nun, was filled with the spirit of wisdom because Moses had laid his hands upon him. And the Israelites heeded him, doing as the Lord had commanded Moses. Never again did there arise in Israel a prophet like Moses. Lo kam b'Yisrael k'Moshe od. In the Yigdal song that we sing on Friday night, the words of this are slightly rearranged for the poetry, but it's based on this verse. Lo kam b'Yisrael k'Moshe od navi umabit et emunato. Right, so that verse, that in Yigdal, is based on this verse 10 right here. Never again did there arise in Israel a prophet like Moses, whom the Lord singled out face to face. For the various signs and portents that the Lord sent him to display in the land of Egypt against Pharaoh and all his courtiers and his whole country, and for all the great might and awesome power that Moses displayed before all Israel. So the first word in the Torah is Breshit. The last word in the Torah is Yisrael. The first letter in the Torah is Bet. The last letter in the Torah is Lamed. Reverse them, you get the word Lev, which means heart. So, there's midrash about the first word, last word. But the question is, did Moses write this? Did Moses write this portion that came clearly after he died? So the traditionalists say yes, and only Moses, because of his great ability, is able to write this back on Mount Sinai, back in Exodus, knowing about his death and knowing that this description that he's the greatest of all prophets. There are rabbis, traditional commentators, who suggest, no, Moses wrote everything until verse 5 of chapter 34, and maybe Joshua wrote the rest. And so there are those traditionalists who it would still be a traditional Jewish idea that perhaps Joshua wrote the end of the Torah so that Moses didn't have to write about his own death. So there's that idea. And then on the below the line, I'd like to share this. With these words, we complete the reading of the Torah. It began in chaos and with God imposing order on the chaos. Right? So that V'ha'aretz hayata tohu vavohu. That's the second verse of the Torah. The land, the earth was tohu vavohu, or chaos, or totally upside down, mishmash. It concludes with a nation of men, women, and children poised on the banks of the Jordan River, ready to begin perhaps the greatest spiritual adventure of all time, the effort to translate God's will into the daily life of a community. So from chaos to extreme order of how a community works based on the covenant and a life lived as described in the laws of the Torah. In synagogues, we complete the Torah and proceed in two directions. So at this point, when we finish here, first we go back to the opening words of Genesis, and we begin again finding new insights on every page, not because the Torah has changed, but because we have changed since we read it a year ago. And then in the Haftarah for Simchat Torah, we go forward into history to read of Joshua's leadership of the people after the death of Moses. So we start the Torah cycle over again because, every time we read through the Torah, we learn something new. We ourselves change from one year to the next, and we find new meaning in it. But also, so it's not just, so completing the cycle of Torah reading isn't just about completing it for the sake of completing it, but it's about knowing that we can do it over and over again and living another year to go through the cycle again. But it's also in the Haftarah going forward to the next book so Torah is about looking in our past to guide us as we move forward. And so that's one idea of Simchat Torah, is that we're rejoicing in this heritage. We're singing and dancing with the Torahs to show how much we enjoy and how much Torah uplifts our lives. But it's also it's about our connection to history and the confidence we have that Torah can give us as we step forward into the new day. So, any questions or comments before we end for today?
Jonah,
Yes,
I have
Joe.
about the tribes and the locations of the tribes.
Yeah.
If the Zebulani were merchants, that might make sense if they're there because they're along the
Caravan
historic north-south road between
Yes.
Assyria, and so maybe they settled in that area. So in the same, why in the Shabbat blessing for sons do they cite Ephraim and Manasseh? Why those two are, and the text is wherever you are, wherever you are, you'll keep the ways of God. So maybe Menashe, they moved around. Maybe they were like,
Yeah.
merchants.
Well, so in the Shabbat Sim Shalom prayer book, which I use when we have a bar or bat mitzvah, I use the poetic prayer that it has here for blessing the children. So, I read, and this is not the traditional blessing is Yesimcha Elohim Kefraim Vechim Nasha. May God put you, literally, or make you, or set you aside, like God did with Ephraim and Manasseh. So the question stands, Joe, why Ephraim and Manasseh, not Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? Because we always quote Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the Amidah, and especially when we're blessing our daughters, we say, Yesimech Elohim, may God put you, set you aside, make you, like Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. So if we have them, who typically we invoke as women models for women, why not typically the male model? So one answer is because Jacob actually blessed Ephraim and Manasseh in the Torah separately. When it's described as Jacob was up in years, Joseph realized his father was near death. He brought his children, his two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, to be blessed by Joseph's father, Jacob. So Jacob crosses his hands because Joseph places them in age order, like the oldest to be under Jacob's hand. And Jacob deliberately crosses his hand to put his right hand over the younger son, Manasseh, and the left hand over the older one, Ephraim. So I think because of that, because we're physically putting our hand on our son's head as we recite this blessing, we're reminding ourselves of Jacob putting his hands on his grandson's heads. So that's why we invoke Ephraim and Manasseh. The English translation in the Shabbat Sim Shalom adds to what you're referring to, Joe. May you be blessed by God as were Ephraim and Manasseh, who understood that wherever they lived, their Jewishness was the essence of their lives, who loved and honored their elders and teachers, and who cherished one another without pettiness or envy, accepting in humility the blessings that were theirs. Was that true? We have no idea. We don't know how Ephraim and Manasseh liked each other or didn't like each other. The editor of this Sim Shalom created this poem that kind of invokes who Ephraim and Manasseh are and what we might want to see in our own children, right? So Joe, the one answer is this is just the poetic prayer that's in this prayer book itself. The other answer is because when we're blessing our children, we are reliving the experience of Jacob blessing his grandsons, which happened 2,800 years ago. So there's something powerful that for 2,800 years, parents were blessing their children. So, how the tribes settled in the land of Israel, I'm not sure what that map is based on. I think it's based on the book of Joshua that describes the incremental settlement of the land of Israel, and probably the book of Judges too, to references in those two biblical books as to where the tribes ended up in the land of Israel. Were Yisachar merchants? Were Zebulun merchants? And was Yisachar Torah scholars? We don't know. The picture for Zebulun, though, the typical picture, if you Google image for tribe of Zebulun, or like on the breastplate that we have on one of the Torah scrolls, has the traditional image for each tribe of Israel. Zebulun as a ship. So that for merchants, that's what the typical picture of a merchant would be. So if you Google that image for Zebulun, a ship comes up. And for Yisachar, it's a tent. So it's not a yeshiva student with payas and tzitzit hanging out. It's just a tent because of what what this verse says. Okay, any other questions or comments before we end for today? So, Moadim L'Simcha, everyone. Stay safe and healthy. Enjoy the rest of the Sukkot holiday. And for other connections today, we have a happy hour at 5 o'clock, just a schmooze. Bring a beverage of your choice. And there's a separate link for connecting for the happy hour at 5. Is that today? No, that's tomorrow. Sorry. Today is just evening minyan at 7:30. Tomorrow is happy hour at 5 o'clock. All right. Have a good rest of the day, everybody.
Bye. Bye all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.